A bleeding mountain, a tortured Dark Lord, Albus Dumbledore hunting the Potter family. Welcome to Year 5, where the heroes are deadlier than the villains. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and sound off in the comments to check in before we dive into the darkness. The Woolworth building stood as a Gothic monolith against the torrential New York downpour, its mundane facade masking the sprawling, golden immensity of the magical Congress of the United States of America. Inside the grand lobby, the perpetual bustle of aurors, bureaucrats, and magical dignitaries usually drowned out the storm outside. Today, however, a suffocating silence had fallen over the marble floors. The heavy brass doors had not simply opened, they had been warded open, the ancient locking mechanisms clicking back in deference to the man stepping over the threshold. Albus Dumbledore did not look like the eccentric headmaster of Hogwarts. The vibrant starry robes were gone, replaced by the austere, heavy midnight blue mantle of the supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. He moved with a quiet, terrifying grace. His silver beard was tucked neatly into his belt, and his expression was carved from pale stone. Behind him walked a cadre of elite ICW enforcers, tall, broad-shouldered witches and wizards whose wands were already drawn and held at rest against their dark coats. Among them, Kingsley Shacklebolt scanned the vaulted ceiling, his face unreadable. "Albus," said President Samuel Quahog, descending the grand staircase with a forced diplomatic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We weren't informed of a formal visitation. If the Confederation had sent word—" "There is no time for the usual pleasantries, Samuel," Dumbledore interrupted gently. His voice was soft, yet it echoed perfectly in the cavernous space, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I am not here on a diplomatic courtesy call. I am invoking Article 7 of the Geneva Magical Accords." A ripple of panicked murmurs broke out among the MACUSA staff standing at the periphery. Article 7 was an emergency measure, an inquest protocol reserved for events that threatened the global statute of secrecy or involved unspeakable magical anomalies. "Article 7?" Quahog's smile vanished. "Regarding what?" "Regarding the conclusion of the Triwizard Tournament and the methods employed by your Royal Magical Auditor, Lily Potter. The labyrinth was a slaughterhouse, Samuel. The magical resonance left behind on Mount Greylock is unnatural. I am officially opening a global inquest into the disappearance of Tom Riddle and the Potter family's direct involvement." "Lily Potter holds absolute authority on American soil," Quahog warned, his voice dropping to a hiss. "She is a sovereign auditor. You cannot touch her here." Dumbledore reached into his robes, withdrawing a heavy scroll bound in silver thread and sealed with the glowing crest of the ICW. "As of an hour ago, the Confederation has voted. Her absolute authority is temporarily suspended. The Potters are now the subjects of an international tribunal." He handed the scroll to the stunned president. "I have come to find the truth, Samuel, whatever it takes." The Berkshire's cabin had always been a sanctuary. Nestled deep in the ancient warded forests of Massachusetts, it was a place where the Potter pack could breathe, train, and bleed in private. Tonight, the air inside felt like a sealed tomb. Lily Potter stood by the heavy oak table in the center of the living room, staring down at the silver badge resting on the wood. The emblem of the Royal Magical Auditor, a symbol of her unassailable power and the shield that had protected her family's brutal crusade, was dead. The usual pulsing gold light within the metal had faded to a dull, lifeless gray. "It's a containment ward," came Remus Lupin quietly from the window. He pushed the curtain aside, peering out into the rain-slicked trees. I can smell them. ICW Aurors. They've established a perimeter a mile out. The anti-apparition jinxes are tied to the continent's ley lines. We can't jump out." Sirius Black slammed his fist into the stone mantelpiece, sending a spray of ash into the fireplace. "That self-righteous, meddling old fool. He has no jurisdiction to trap us in our own home." "He has the backing of 70 magical nations, Sirius," Lily replied, her voice eerily calm, though her green eyes burned with a dangerous, calculating fire. "He used the anomalies of the maze, the massive spike in dark magic. He convinced the Confederation that we are hiding a weapon of mass destruction. Legally, we are grounded pending an investigation." Harry sat in the corner, methodically sharpening a hunting knife. He looked up, his face an impassive mask. He had grown leaner, harder over the past year. The boy who survived the tournament was gone. What remained was a cold, efficient predator molded by his mother's desperation and his godfather's rage. "So we are prisoners," Harry said flatly. "No," Lily corrected, picking up the dead badge and slipping it into her pocket. "We are cornered. There is a difference. Dumbledore wants to provoke a reaction. He wants us to lash out, to prove to the ICW that we are the dark, unstable monsters he suspects us to be." "He knows," Sirius growled, turning to face her. "Lily, he saw the maze. He felt the wards. He knows we didn't just hit Riddle with a killing curse." "He suspects," Remus amended, his scarred face drawn and pale. He looked at Harry, a flicker of profound unease in his amber eyes. "But he doesn't have proof. If he knew what we actually did, if he knew what is buried under that mountain, he wouldn't be playing politics. He'd be calling for our execution." "Then we give him nothing," Lily commanded, looking at the three men. "We comply with the inquest, we smile for the tribunal, we let him dig, and we ensure he hits solid rock." The hearing room, deep within the bowels of MACUSA headquarters, was deliberately designed to be intimidating. Cold, black basalt walls curved upward into a domed ceiling, focusing all sound down toward the solitary wooden chair in the center of the room. Harry sat in that chair. He did not fidget. He did not look around. He kept his hands resting loosely on his thighs, his posture relaxed, exuding the chilling stillness of a coiled snake. From the elevated semicircle of judges' benches, Dumbledore looked down at him. Beside the supreme mugwump sat Severus Snape, brought in as an expert consultant on dark arts trauma. Snape's black eyes were fixed on Harry, glittering with barely concealed disdain. "Mr. Potter," Dumbledore began, his voice echoing in the stone chamber, "I must ask you again, when the portkey delivered you and Mr. Riddle to the center of the labyrinth, what spell did your mother use to subdue him?" "I have already answered, Chief Warlock," Harry said, his voice even. "My mother neutralized the threat using sanctioned lethal force. The resulting magical backlash destroyed the body." "A convenient conclusion," Snape sneered, leaning forward. "A dark wizard of his magnitude simply evaporated by lethal force. The energy required to disintegrate a physical form leaves traces, Potter. Yet the mountain reeks of containment magic, not destruction, containment." Harry met Snape's gaze. "I am not a magical theoretician, sir. I am just a boy who survived." "Do not play the fool with me," Snape whispered softly, though the acoustics carried his voice perfectly. Then Harry felt it. It wasn't a sudden, violent intrusion. It was a cold, insidious slip, a needle of ice sliding between his thoughts. Snape was attempting passive legilimacy, trying to bypass Harry's conscious defenses by riding the slipstream of eye contact. He was searching for the memory of the crimson rot, the image of Voldemort screaming as the earth swallowed him alive in an eternal crippled cage. Harry didn't panic. He didn't raise the standard occlumency shields he had been taught at Hogwarts. Standard shields could be battered down. Standard shields were rigid. Instead, Harry let Snape in. He allowed the cold needle to pierce his outer consciousness, and then, with a thought, Harry unleashed the inheritance of Sirius's blood adoption, the ancient, heavy resonance of the Black family magic, a power born of madness, deep oceans, and crushing gravity, surged forward. Inside Harry's mind, Snape didn't find memories of the maze. He found a sudden, suffocating sea of black tar. It slammed into the potions master's consciousness with the force of a physical blow, wrapping around the potions master's probing mind, crushing it, suffocating the intrusion. In the physical world, less than a second had passed. Snape suddenly gasped, choking on air. He lurched backward, his chair scraping violently against the stone floor. His hands flew to his face as a thin, bright stream of blood began to run from his left nostril. He stared at Harry, his dark eyes wide with sudden, unadulterated terror. The entire courtroom went dead silent. Harry hadn't moved a muscle. He hadn't drawn his wand. He simply blinked, tilting his head slightly. "Is the consultant unwell?" Harry asked mildly. Dumbledore stood up slowly, ignoring Snape's ragged breathing. The supreme mugwump looked at the boy sitting in the center of the room. Dumbledore's eyes no longer held the twinkle of a grandfather. They were filled with the profound, sorrowful realization that the boy sitting before him was no longer entirely human. "We will take a recess," Dumbledore announced softly, never breaking eye contact with Harry. The rain continued to batter the Berkshires 3 days later. Lily was in the basement modifying their weapons, and Harry was asleep, leaving Sirius and Remus alone in the parlor when the knock came. It was a polite, rhythmic tapping on the glass of the front door. Remus drew his wand instantly, moving to the peephole. He exhaled a tense breath. "It's him, Dumbledore, alone." "Tell him to rot in hell," Sirius snarled, pacing in front of the dying fire like a caged wolf. "We can't. If we deny the Supreme Mugwump entry to a civilian dwelling, we give him probable cause to breach the wards by force," Remus said logically, though his jaw was tight. He pulled the door open, letting him unlocked. Albus Dumbledore stood on the porch, an umbrella hovering charmed above his head. "Good evening, Remus, Sirius. May I come in for a brief moment? I find the American autumn incredibly damp." "Make it fast, Albus," Sirius spat as Dumbledore stepped inside, folding his hands neatly in front of him. "I won't take much of your time," Dumbledore said, stepping into the parlor. He didn't look at the weapons scattered on the table, nor the dark, heavy warding runes carved into the baseboards. Instead, he looked at the mantel, where a single moving photograph of James Potter sat in a silver frame. Dumbledore walked over to it, his expression softening into genuine grief. "He was a brilliant boy, your James." "Don't," Sirius warned, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his wand. "Don't you dare talk about him." "I talk about him because I remember who he was," Dumbledore said softly, turning to face the two men. "James Potter was brave, Sirius. He was fiercely loyal, but above all, he was a man of honor. He fought in the light. He would duel his enemies face to face, and if he had to kill, it was swift. It was a soldier's burden." Dumbledore's blue eyes shifted to Remus, pinning the werewolf to the spot. "He was not an executioner, Remus. He was not a torturer." Remus flinched visibly. The words struck with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, cutting straight into the festering guilt Remus had been harboring since the night of the Triwizard climax. "We did what was needed to protect his son," Sirius growled, stepping between Dumbledore and Remus. "Did you?" Dumbledore countered, his voice rising just a fraction, vibrating with quiet power. "Look at the boy, Sirius. Look at what you and Lily have turned him into. I looked into Harry's eyes at the tribunal. I felt the magic he lashed out with. It was dark, cold, and entirely merciless. You have saved Harry's body, perhaps, but at what cost to his soul? His soul is intact, Sirius hissed. Is it? Dumbledore asked softly. He looked back to Remus. You are the conscience of this pack, Moony. You know the difference between justice and cruelty. Whatever Lily did in that maze, whatever you helped her bury under the earth, it is festering, and it is poisoning Harry from the inside out. James would weep to see his son turned into a weapon of pure malice. Get out, Remus whispered. His voice trembled. I am trying to save him, Remus, before the dark magic you've unleashed consumes you all. He turned and walked out the door, stepping back into the freezing rain. Sirius slammed the door shut, locking it with 3 heavy magical bolts. He turned to Remus, his eyes blazing. Don't listen to a word that manipulative old bastard says. We did the right thing. Remus didn't answer. He just stared at the photograph of James, the silence in the cabin growing heavier, thicker, as the first hairline fracture in their family began to spread. Midnight at Ilvermorny was usually a time of serene quiet, the ancient school resting atop Mount Greylock under a blanket of stars. But deep beneath the bedrock, hundreds of feet below the ruined Quidditch stadium, there was no peace. In his bed at the Berkshire's cabin miles away, Harry Potter violently jerked awake. He didn't scream because a predator never made unnecessary noise, but his teeth ground together so hard his jaw ached. He clawed at his left forearm, the exact spot where he had dragged a silver blade across his own flesh months ago, letting his blood spill onto the granite seal to lock the crimson crypt. Pain. It wasn't a sharp, sudden pain. It was a suffocating, crushing, burning agony that defied human comprehension. It was the sensation of being trapped in a box no larger than a coffin, your bones shattered, your magic eating itself alive in the dark, unable to die, unable to breathe. Harry fell out of bed, hitting the floorboards hard. He curled into a tight ball, clutching his arm, panting rapidly in the dark. It was the blood tether. The ritual had tied his magical core to the containment ward. He was feeling an echo of it. He was feeling him, Voldemort. Miles away, on the grounds of Mount Greylock, the earth began to groan. It started as a low subsonic vibration that rattled the glass in the Ilvermorny greenhouses. Then a sharp, localized tremor violently shook the forest floor. It wasn't a tectonic shift. It was a desperate, enraged thrashing from deep below. A lone ICW Auror patrolling the perimeter of the ruined labyrinth stumbled as the ground heaved beneath his boots. He raised his wand, casting a Lumos Maxima that illuminated the dense tree line bordering the pitch. "Control, this is Sector 4, the Auror muttered into a communication mirror. We've got seismic activity, localized to the stadium ruins. As the light from his wand swept across the ancient pine trees bordering the pitch, the Auror stopped. He stepped closer to the nearest tree, his brow furrowing in confusion. The bark of the tree was blistering. It looked like the wood was boiling from the inside. With a sickening wet crack, the bark split open. It didn't bleed normal sap. A thick, viscous, pitch-black sludge began to ooze from the wound in the tree, steaming slightly in the cool night air. It smelled like copper, rotting meat, and dark magic so concentrated it made the Auror's eyes water. The tremor ceased, but the damage was done. Voldemort was not resting in peace. The sheer, unfathomable agony of a soul trapped in a crippled, rotting body for eternity was too much for the earth to contain. His unending suffering was acting like a radioactive core, mutating the containment magic. The dark magic was seeking an escape. It was infecting the root system of the mountain, traveling through the soil, poisoning the very ley lines that fed Ilvermorny and the American magical ecosystem. In the cabin, Harry finally stopped shaking. He pulled himself up against his bed frame, his chest heaving, his forehead drenched in cold sweat. He looked down at his left arm. The veins beneath his skin were pulsing with a faint, sickly crimson light. The god they had buried was waking the earth, and the mountain was beginning to bleed. The Ilvermorny hospital wing was normally a place of quiet, sterile comfort, smelling of lavender and myrtlap essence. By the second week of November, it smelled of ozone, fear, and cold sweat. Albus Dumbledore stood at the foot of a wrought iron bed, his hands clasped behind his back, his blue eyes entirely devoid of their usual warmth. On the bed, a fourth-year horned serpent student was thrashing violently against enchanted restraints. The boy's eyes were rolled back in his head, his mouth wide in a silent, agonizing scream, his fingernails entirely torn off from clawing at the stone floor during his sleep. "He won't wake up," Healer Masterson whispered, a severe-looking witch whose apron was stained with spilled potions. "This is the 7th case this week, Supreme Mugwump. The drought of peace evaporates in their systems. Dreamless sleep turns into a paralytic. They are all experiencing the exact same night terror." "Describe it to me again, Healer," Dumbledore commanded softly. "They say they are trapped. They describe the feeling of tons of crushed rock pressing down on their chests. They can't breathe, but they can't die. They just rot in the dark. It's localized entirely to students whose dormitories face the northern slope, facing the old Quidditch pitch." Dumbledore turned away from the thrashing boy and walked out into the corridor, pulling a heavy brass navigational compass from his robes. It wasn't designed to find north, it was an arithmetic ley line tracker, built to read the flow of natural magic through the earth. He opened the lid. The silver needle, which should have pointed steadily toward the mountain's magical core, was spinning wildly, violently shivering before locking on the northern slope. The glass face of the compass was misting over with a sickly crimson condensation. Kingsley Shacklebolt materialized from the shadows of the corridor, his dark aura drobes blending seamlessly with the gloom. "We've finished the perimeter sweep, Dumbledore. You need to see the greenhouses." 10 minutes later, Dumbledore stood in the torrential rain outside Greenhouse 3. The glass structure was usually a riot of vibrant magical North American flora. Now it looked like a graveyard. The massive Snargaluff pods were shriveled and gray. The usually aggressive venomous tentacula vines lay limp on the soil. But the true horror was the soil itself. It was bubbling. A thick, viscous black sap was seeping up through the earth, pooling around the dead roots of the plants. It smelled of ancient copper, rotting meat, and a dark magic so concentrated it made the Dumbledore's eyes water. Kingsley levitated a silver vial, collecting a sample of the sludge. The glass immediately began to hiss and pit, the dark magic corroding the physical container. "It's not a poison, Albus," Kingsley rumbled, his deep voice laced with unease. "The earth is polluting the ley lines. The flora is dying because the magic feeding it is contaminated." Dumbledore looked up the mountain, staring through the rain toward the ruined, warded perimeter of the Triwizard Labyrinth. The pieces were beginning to align in his brilliant mind, forming a picture so depraved he almost refused to believe it. "The students are not having nightmares, Kingsley," Dumbledore said softly, the rain plastering his silver hair to his forehead. "The earth is screaming, and the mountain is bleeding to let it out." Harry Potter was drowning in dry earth. He knelt on the floor of the Berkshire's cabin basement, his forehead pressed against the cold concrete. He was alone, having locked the heavy iron door from the inside. He had bitten through his own lower lip 10 minutes ago. the taste of copper filling his mouth, but it wasn't enough to distract him from the agony radiating from his left forearm. He rolled onto his back, gasping for air that felt like dust in his lungs. He rolled up his sleeve. The scar where he had drawn the silver blade to enact the blood-sealing ritual was no longer a pale white line. It was an angry, raised lattice of pulsing crimson veins. The dark light beneath his skin throbbed in a slow, agonizing rhythm, the heartbeat of a buried god. Because Harry had used his own blood to tear open the earth, to command the granite to crush and entomb the Dark Lord, his magical core was permanently tethered to the containment ward. He was the anchor, and the anchor was beginning to heat up. "Let me die." The thought wasn't his own. It echoed in the cavern of his skull, a high, cold, raspy voice that had been entirely stripped of its former majesty, reduced to the pathetic, unending whimper of a tortured animal. "Shut up!" Harry hissed through his bloody teeth, his fingers digging rigidly into his own scalp. "Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!" Crushed. "It burns. Let me die." Harry convulsed, his spine arching off the concrete as a phantom sensation of a ribcage snapping shattered through his nervous system. Voldemort was trying to move his crippled, buried husk, and the earth was punishing him for it, crushing him tighter. And Harry felt the echo of every shattered bone. He lay there for an hour, riding out the tremor, his breathing shallow and ragged. He had been trained by Lily and Sirius to ignore pain, to compartmentalize trauma, to be a weapon that did not dull. But this was not physical pain he could power through. This was an erosion of his very soul. He slowly pulled himself up, using a workbench for support. He caught his reflection in a cracked mirror leaning against the stone wall. He looked like a ghost. His skin was sallow. Deep purple bruises shadowed his eyes, and the vibrant, killing curse breen of his irises was clouded with a sickly red haze. He pulled down his sleeve, buttoning the cuff tightly. He could not tell Lily. If he showed weakness, if he admitted that the seal was killing him, she would try to fix it, and trying to fix it might mean letting the monster out. Harry would burn from the inside out before he allowed the man who murdered his father to see the sun again. Chapter 8. The Fox Intervention. "A mandatory wellness check," Remus said, his voice tight as he read the official ICW scroll presented to him at the front door. "Standard procedure for minors involved in a global inquest," Dumbledore replied smoothly from the porch. Behind him, the rain had finally stopped, replaced by a biting, freezing wind that whipped through the Berkshires. "I assure you, Remus, it is merely a formality. I have brought no aurors, only myself." Remus hesitated, his golden eyes scanning the tree line, before stepping aside. "Lily is at the Macusa archives in the city, trying to fight your injunctions. It's just me, Sirius, and the boy." "Perfect," Dumbledore murmured, stepping inside. He found Harry sitting at the kitchen table, methodically cleaning the parts of a disassembled magical explosive. Harry did not look up when Dumbledore entered. "Harry," Dumbledore greeted gently. Harry remained silent, snapping a firing pin into place. Dumbledore stepped closer, and his sharp eyes immediately catalogued Harry's deterioration, the tremors in Harry's usually steady hands, the unnatural, waxy pallor of his skin, the heavy, exhausted slump of his shoulders. "You are unwell," Dumbledore stated, the political mask dropping, replaced by genuine, profound concern. "I'm perfectly fine, Supreme Mugwump," Harry said, his voice rasping slightly. "Do not lie to me, child." Dumbledore stepped directly across from Harry. Before anyone could react, a burst of golden flame erupted on the back of the wooden chair next to Dumbledore. Fawkes the Phoenix materialized, his crimson and gold feathers brilliant against the gloomy cabin. Fawkes did not trill his usual uplifting song. The bird looked at Harry and let out a low, mournful croon. It was a sound of absolute heartbreak. Fawkes senses corruption. He senses a wound that cannot heal. Before Harry could pull away, Fawkes fluttered onto the table. The Phoenix leaned forward, hovering his beak over Harry's left forearm. A single pearlescent tear fell from the bird's eye, dropping directly onto the fabric of Harry's sleeve, soaking through to the skin. Phoenix tears were the purest healing magic in the world. They cured poisons, sealed wounds, and purged dark magic. The moment the tear touched Harry's skin, it reacted like water hitting a grease fire. A deafening hiss echoed in the kitchen. Harry screamed, a raw, visceral sound of pure agony, and violently shoved the table backward, scrambling away. Smoke, thick and smelling of burning copper, poured from his left sleeve. Sirius and Remus rushed into the room, wands drawn. Sirius immediately stepped between Dumbledore and Harry, his wand pointed directly at the old man's chest. "What did you do to him?" "You did nothing," Dumbledore whispered, his eyes wide with horror, staring at Harry. Harry was on the ground, gripping his left arm. The sleeve had burned away, revealing the pulsing, violently red lattice of veins. The Phoenix tear had recognized the blood tether not as a wound, but as an active, malicious curse of unspeakable darkness, and it had attempted to purge it. Dumbledore looked from the glowing, corrupted veins on Harry's arm to the horrified faces of Sirius and Remus. The supreme mugwump's brilliant mind clicked the final horrifying piece of the puzzle into place. The black sap, the earthquakes, the nightmares of being buried, the blood tether. "He isn't dead," Dumbledore breathed, the realization stripping the color from his own face. The sheer scale of the atrocity left the ancient wizard momentarily paralyzed. "Lily didn't use a killing curse in the maze. She did not destroy Tom." Dumbledore looked down at Harry, who was panting on the floor, his green eyes blazing with defiance despite the pain. "You buried him alive," Dumbledore said, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and absolute disgust. "You entombed a living soul under millions of tons of rock. You cursed him to an eternity of suffocating agony, and you tethered your own son's life force to the lock to ensure he could never be freed." Sirius did not lower his wand. He got exactly what he deserved. "You fools!" Dumbledore roared, his magical aura flaring, rattling the windows of the cabin. "I am going to shatter that crypt, Sirius. I am going to end that creature's misery before your vengeance destroys the world." The door slammed shut, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. Remus Lupin stood over the kitchen sink, staring at his bloodied hands. He had just finished applying a heavy essence of dittany and numbing salves to Harry's arm, forcing the boy into a magically induced sleep in the back bedroom. The front door opened, and Lily stepped inside, shaking the rain from her dark cloak. She looked exhausted, her usually sharp features drawn and pale from a day of fighting Makusa bureaucrats. "I managed to stall the ICW audit on our Gringotts accounts," she said, dropping her bag onto the floor. She noticed the lingering smoke, the overturned table, and the smell of ozone. She froze, her hand instantly dropping to the holster on her thigh. "What happened?" "Dumbledore was here," Remus said, his voice eerily quiet. He didn't turn around. Sirius sat in the corner, staring into the middle distance, an uncharacteristically helpless look on his face. "What did he do?" Lily demanded, stepping into the kitchen. He didn't do anything, Lily. Remus finally turned. His amber eyes, usually so warm, were terrifyingly blank. Fawkes did. The phoenix cried on Harry's arm, and the healing magic nearly burned his arm off because the magic in Harry's blood is so dark, so violently corrupted, that a creature of pure light registered it as a lethal curse. Lily's breath hitched, but she quickly masked it with cold pragmatism. I will adjust the containment wards. I can brew a suppressing draught for the resonance. Stop it, Remus snarled, taking a step toward her. The wolf inside him, usually kept on a tight, disciplined leash, was snarling at the surface. Stop treating him like a broken wand that just needs a new core. He is a 15-year-old boy, Lily, and he is dying. Dumbledore figured it out. He knows Voldemort is alive under the dirt. He knows about the blood tether. Then Dumbledore is a threat we need to manage, Lily replied coldly, her green eyes narrowing. If he tries to break the seal, we drop him. Remus stared at the woman he had loved like a sister for decades. He looked at her and saw a stranger, a brilliant, terrifying, utterly ruthless general who had forgotten how to be a mother. Listen to yourself, Remus whispered, his voice cracking. Listen to what you are saying. We are talking about assassinating the supreme mugwump to protect a torture chamber. Is this what James died for, so we could become exactly like the Death Eaters we hunted? Do not use my husband's name to justify your weakness, Remus, Lily hissed, stepping into his space, her own magical aura flaring dangerously. We won. We ended the war. Tom Riddle is neutralized permanently. We did what the Order of the Phoenix was too cowardly to do. And the price is Harry's soul, Remus shouted, slamming his fist onto the counter, cracking the granite. I felt the magic radiating off him, Lily. It is cold. It is dead. He feels that monster thrashing in the dark every second of every day. The dark magic is bleeding into him. If we don't sever the tether, if we don't let Dumbledore euthanize Riddle, the resonance will kill Harry, or worse, it will hollow him out until there's nothing left but a shell. Lily stared at him, her face an unreadable mask of ice. I will not let my son die, and I will not let the man who murdered his father find peace in death. I will find a way to sever the tether without breaking the seal. How? Asked Sirius, finally speaking up, his voice hoarse. Dumbledore's right, Lils. The magic is ancient. It's rooted in the earth. You can't just cut it. Not with modern magic, Lily agreed, her mind already rapidly pivoting, calculating, planning. She looked at Sirius. Before Makusa was formed, before the Statute of Secrecy, the indigenous shamans of this continent practiced a form of arithmancy based on blood and earth severing, total localized decoupling. Those texts are restricted, Sirius said, frowning. Makusa confiscated them in the 18th century. They're locked in the deep storage vault beneath the Woolworth building. Then we take them, Lily stated simply. Remus took a step back, shaking his head in disbelief. You're insane. You're talking about robbing the Magical Congress of the United States during an active international inquest. If you're caught, it's Azkaban or execution. Then we won't get caught, Lily said. She turned to Sirius. Wake Harry up. Give him a pepper-up potion. We prep in an hour. Leave the boy out of it, Remus pleaded. He's sick, Lily. Let me go with Sirius. Lily looked at Remus, her eyes devoid of warmth. You don't believe in the mission anymore, Moony. Your hesitation will get Sirius killed. Harry is focused. Harry is a weapon. He goes. Remus watched her walk down into the basement armory, feeling a cold, devastating certainty wash over him. Dumbledore was right. The dark magic hadn't just corrupted the mountain, it had already corrupted the Potter Pack. The fracture was complete. The deep storage vaults of Makusa did not use goblins, dragons, or simple iron doors. They used space. Located theoretically beneath the Woolworth building, the vaults were actually pocket dimensions suspended in a localized vacuum of null magic. To access Vault 47, the restricted arithmancy archive, one had to bypass 3 checkpoints of Auror guards, navigate a labyrinth of moving staircases, and step through a waterfall of pure Lethe River water designed to wipe the memory of anyone lacking a specific, authorized magical signature. At 2 a.m., the sub-basement corridor was silent, save for the rhythmic pacing of 2 elite Makusa guards. From the shadows of a marble pillar, 2 figures watched them. They were draped in heavy, light-absorbing cloaks, their faces concealed by black tactical masks woven with localized notice-me-not charms. Sirius Black raised 2 fingers, silently counting down. 3, 2, 1. They moved with terrifying synchronized fluidity. Sirius lunged from the shadows, crossing the 30 feet of hallway in a blur of motion. He didn't use a wand. He slammed the heel of his hand into the sternum of the first guard, driving the air from the man's lungs, before pivoting and burying a heavy sleeper hold into his neck. The guard crumpled instantly. Simultaneously, Harry dropped from the ceiling, having scaled the sheer stone wall like an arachnid, landing silently behind the second guard. Before the man could raise his wand or shout, Harry swept the guard's legs out from under him, catching his head before it hit the stone floor, and pressed a chloroform-soaked cloth laced with draught of living death over his mouth and nose. The corridor was secure in under 4 seconds. No spells cast, no magical alarms triggered. "Clean," Sirius whispered, dragging the bodies into an alcove. "Good form, pup." Harry didn't smile. He simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the massive shimmering waterfall of Lethe water that blocked the entrance to the vault sector. The waterfall. How do we bypass the memory wipe? "We don't bypass it, we overwhelm it," Sirius said, pulling a heavy lead-lined flask from his tactical vest. He uncorked it. The smell of copper and rotting meat instantly filled the hallway. It was the corrupted black sap Lily had harvested from the edge of the Ilvermorny wards. "Stand back," Sirius ordered. He hurled the flask directly into the shimmering curtain of water. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The pure, memory-erasing water clashed with the hyper-concentrated dark magic of Voldemort's agony. The waterfall violently hissed, flashing a blinding, sickly green before turning entirely black and solidifying into a brittle, glass-like substance. Sirius drew his wand. Reducto. The black glass shattered, raining down in harmless crystalline shards, revealing the heavy bronze door of Vault 47. "We have exactly 3 minutes before the atmospheric pressure sensors detect the change in humidity and trigger a lockdown," Sirius said, stepping over the threshold. The vault was massive, filled with endless rows of floating stone tablets and rotting parchment scrolls. Harry immediately moved to the left quadrant, his eyes scanning the ancient runic labels. His left arm throbbed a constant dull rhythm, a reminder of the ticking clock on his own life. "Found it," Harry called out softly. He reached out and grabbed a bundle of leather-bound scrolls bound in silver wire. The moment his fingers brushed the leather, the magical alarms triggered. It wasn't a siren, it was a complete shift in gravity. The floor beneath them suddenly became the wall, and the ceiling became the floor. Harry slammed hard against the stone, the breath knocked out of him. The heavy bronze door of the vault began to slide shut, threatening to seal them in the pocket dimension forever. "Move!" Sirius roared, fighting the disorienting gravity shift. He grabbed Harry by the tactical harness, using his own momentum to hurl the boy toward the closing door. Harry slid across the slick stone, clutching the scrolls to his chest, and tumbled through the gap just as the bronze door slammed shut with a concussive boom. Sirius hadn't made it. Harry scrambled to his feet, staring at the sealed door. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his predatory conditioning. "Sirius!" A second later, with a sound like a thunderclap, Sirius apparated directly beside him, stumbling and falling to one knee. He was gasping for air, blood trickling from his nose. "You can't apparate in a null magic zone," Harry said, his eyes wide. "Black family magic," Sirius wheezed, wiping the blood from his face and grinning wildly. "Doesn't play by the rules. Come on, the Auror Corps is going to be swarming this place in 30 seconds. They sprinted back down the corridor, the stolen arithmancy texts secured. They had the means to sever the tether, but as they vanished into the New York night, Harry felt another massive shuddering throb from his left arm. The earth was violently rejecting its prisoner, and Dumbledore was already moving to break the seal. The race to the mountain had begun. The Grand Amphitheater of the International Confederation of Wizards in Geneva was a masterpiece of magical architecture, built from white marble and illuminated by thousands of floating golden spheres. It was a room designed for diplomacy, for the measured, polite exchange of global magical policy. Today, it was a courtroom for a witch hunt. Albus Dumbledore stood at the center podium, not as a headmaster, but fully embodying the mantle of the supreme mugwump. His voice, magically amplified, rolled over the hundreds of seated delegates from across the globe. He did not shout. The quiet, profound sorrow in his tone was far more devastating. "We are the custodians of our world's magic," Dumbledore echoed, his blue eyes sweeping across the tiers of nervous politicians. "We are bound by ancient laws to ensure that the earth which feeds our spellcraft remains pure. I stand before you today not to condemn a woman out of malice, but to save a continent from a creeping, unnatural death." In the lower galleries, sitting in a containment box warded with anti-magic runes, Lily Potter watched him. She wore a tailored black suit, her expression carved from ice. She looked every inch the lethal, sovereign auditor she had been, but she could feel the room turning against her with every word Dumbledore spoke. With a wave of his wand, Dumbledore conjured a massive, three-dimensional illusion in the center of the room. It was a topographical map of the American Northeast, centered on Mount Greylock. The ley lines, usually depicted as glowing blue rivers of energy, were tainted. A sickly, pulsing crimson rot was spreading from the mountain's core, branching out like infected veins. "The soil is blistering," Dumbledore continued, gesturing to the projection. "The flora is dying. Magical children sleeping near the epicenter are being subjected to empathetic night terrors so severe they are requiring magical comas to survive. The resonance is spreading. If left unchecked, this rot will reach the New York ley lines within a month. It will corrupt the foundational magic of the entire eastern seaboard." A panicked murmur rippled through the delegates. "The cause," Dumbledore said, his voice cutting through the noise, "is not a natural phenomenon. It is a man-made atrocity." He turned to look directly at Lily. "The Royal Magical Auditor, Lily Potter, did not execute the dark wizard known as Lord Voldemort. She used an ancient, unsanctioned blood ritual to entomb his soul within a crushed, crippled body, burying him alive beneath millions of tons of granite. The dark magic we are seeing is the earth violently reacting to a soul trapped in eternal, unimaginable agony." The amphitheater erupted. Witches and wizards stood, shouting in horror and outrage. The concept of eternal burial, denying a soul the release of death, was considered one of the most abhorrent violations of natural law in magical theory. The Supreme Judge banged his gavel, firing a cannon blast charm into the ceiling to restore order. "Silence! Supreme Mugwump, what is your proposition?" "Euthanasia," Dumbledore stated firmly. "The immediate dismantling of the Potter containment wards. The granite seal must be shattered, and the entity beneath must be granted a mercy kill. The soul must be severed from the physical plane so the earth can begin to heal." "Objection!" Lily's voice rang out, sharp as a cracked whip. She stood up, her green eyes blazing. "That seal is tied directly to my son's life force. If you shatter the wards forcefully, the magical backlash will kill Harry." Dumbledore's expression softened into an expression of agonizing pity. "Your son is already dying, Lily. The tether is poisoning his core. If we do not intervene, the resonance will consume him entirely. You have forced my hand." He looked back to the judge. "I formally accuse Lily Potter of profound dark arts violations, and I request a global mandate to lead an expedition to Mount Greylock to break the seal." The vote took less than 5 minutes. It was nearly unanimous. As the gavel fell, stripping Lily of her international protections and labeling her a rogue threat, she didn't blink. She simply turned, her eyes meeting Dumbledore's across the vast room. The political war was over. The physical war had just begun. An ocean away, in a heavily warded safe house off the coast of Maine, Alastair Mad-Eye Moody paced in front of a wooden chair. His magical eye spun wildly in its socket, scanning the damp stone walls for eavesdroppers, before locking back on the man strapped to the seat. Peter Pettigrew looked pathetic. He was shivering, his clothes damp with sweat, staring up at Moody and Kingsley Shacklebolt with wide, watery eyes. Dumbledore's loyalists had tracked him down 2 days ago, catching him attempting to board a mundane freighter bound for South America. "I don't know anything," Peter whimpered, straining against the enchanted ropes. "I swear it. I just run errands. I just do what she tells me." "Don't lie to me, rat," Moody growled, leaning in close, his breath smelling of stale whiskey and metallic potions. "You were there. You were her inside man for years. You helped them build the traps. You know exactly what they buried under that mountain, and more importantly, you know how the wards are layered. Dumbledore needs the structural schematics of the granite seal to break it without killing the Potter boy." "I can't," Peter choked out, a line of blood suddenly leaking from his left nostril. He gasped, his eyes rolling back slightly. "The vow! She made me take a vow. If I speak of the seal, if I betray the pack's secret." "We know about the unbreakable vow, Peter." Kingsley stepped forward, his deep voice soothing but firm. "But there are loopholes in intent. If we use legitimacy, if we extract the memory forcefully, you're not technically speaking the secret. You're not betraying them. We are taking it." "It's a risk," Moody grunted, drawing his wand, "but it's one we have to take. Dumbledore needs the ward layers." Hundreds of miles away, in the Berkshire's cabin, Lily Potter was sitting over the stolen arithmetics texts when she felt it. It was a sharp, burning pull in her magical core, a tether vibrating like a plucked violin string. "They have Peter," Lily whispered. Sirius, who was cleaning his weapons at the kitchen table, looked up sharply. "The order?" "Yes." Lily closed her eyes, focusing on the magical feedback. "They are trying to bypass the unbreakable vow. They are trying to extract the ward schematics from his mind." Sirius stood up, his jaw tight. "If Dumbledore gets the schematics, he won't have to break the seal blindly. He can dismantle it surgically. He can let the monster out without risking a backlash." "I know," Lily said. Her voice was terrifyingly flat. She stood up, walking to the center of the room. She raised her right hand, the hand that had held the wand when she bound Peter's soul to silence. "Lily, what are you doing?" Remus asked, stepping out of the shadows of the hallway. He saw the cold, detached look in her eyes and felt a spike of pure dread. "Lily, wait! If you pull on the vow while they're extracting, it will register as a breach of contract," Lily finished for him. "It will kill him," Remus shouted, stepping toward her. "He's a coward, but he's under duress. He isn't choosing to betray us." "Intent doesn't matter to ancient magic," Lily said, her hand beginning to glow with a faint golden light. "I will not risk the containment to spare a rat." "He's our friend," Remus roared, drawing his wand. but his hand shook. "Don't do this. You're crossing a line you can never come back from." Lily didn't even look at him. She closed her fist. In the safe house in Maine, Moody had just breached Peter's surface thoughts when the rat let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a shrill, wet shriek. A glowing golden chain suddenly materialized around Peter's throat. It snapped tight with the force of a hydraulic press. Peter's eyes bulged, the blood vessels in his sclera popping instantly. He thrashed against the ropes, gagging, choking on his own tongue, as the magic of the unbreakable vow activated, crushing his windpipe. "Counter curse!" Kingsley shouted, firing a barrage of severing charms at the golden chain. The spells bounced off harmlessly. The magic was absolute. Moody staggered back, holding his head as the violent psychic feedback of a dying mind expelled him from Peter's consciousness. They watched in helpless horror as Peter Pettigrew convulsed one final time, his neck snapping with a loud crack under the pressure of the magical bond. He slumped forward, dead. In the cabin, the golden glow faded from Lily's hand. She turned back to the arithmetics texts, her face entirely devoid of emotion. "The secret is safe," Lily said. Remus looked at her, lowered his wand, and walked out of the room. The pack was broken. The stolen arithmancy scrolls were brilliant, offering a theoretical framework for severing a blood tether by transferring the resonance into a proxy object, a dark magical sink. But the translation from pre-colonial dialects was agonizingly slow, and Harry was running out of time. He had locked himself in the basement for 3 days. He refused to let Lily see him shake. He refused to let Sirius see him bleed from his nose every time the mountain groaned. The physical pain was excruciating, but the psychological torture was destroying his mind. As the dark magic beneath Mount Greylock mutated, the containment wards were beginning to fray at the edges. They weren't breaking, but they were thinning, allowing more of the entity's psychic agony to bleed up the tether directly into Harry's consciousness. He sat in the dark, his knees pulled to his chest, rocking slightly. "Please!" The voice in his head was a wet, ragged rasp. It no longer sounded like the arrogant, terrifying Dark Lord who had commanded armies. It sounded like a broken thing, a crushed insect twitching in the dark. "Please, it hurts, it burns. Just let me die. Kill me, please." Harry slammed the heels of his hands into his temples, his breathing ragged. "Stop it! Stop it! You deserve it! You murdered my father! You tore my family apart! You deserve every second! I beg you, end it! The dark, the crushing! Please, boy!" Harry let out a choked sob, immediately biting down on his own hand to stifle the sound. His predatory conditioning, the ruthless, lethal focus instilled by his mother, was warring with a fundamental, undeniable human empathy. He was an executioner, a soldier, a survivor, but he was not a torturer. He could feel the sheer, unadulterated weight of the rock pressing down on Voldemort's shattered ribcage. He could feel the dark magic burning the monster's skin, only to magically regenerate it so it could burn again. It was a loop of infinite suffering. Harry looked down at his left arm. The veins were no longer just red, they were turning a sickly, necrotic black. The magic was hollowing him out. He realized with a cold, terrifying clarity that Lemus and Dumbledore were right. Lily hadn't just built a prison for Voldemort, she had built one for Harry too. As long as the monster suffered, Harry would suffer. They were bound by blood and dirt. "I can't do this anymore," Harry whispered into the empty basement, a tear cutting through the grime on his cheek. "I can't." He stood up, his legs trembling violently. He didn't go upstairs to tell Lily. He didn't go to Sirius. He grabbed his tactical jacket, slipped his wand into his holster, and walked out the storm doors into the freezing Massachusetts night. He needed to go to the mountain. He didn't know what he was going to do when he got there, but the screaming in his head had to stop. The storm that raged over Mount Greylock was not natural. It was a localized atmospheric anomaly, born of the immense magical pressure building beneath the earth. The sky was a bruised, violent purple, and the rain fell in sheets of freezing, jagged sleet. Albus Dumbledore stood at the edge of the tree line, looking over the massive crater that had once been the Triwizard Labyrinth. The stands were reduced to rubble. The earth was scarred and blackened, smelling of ozone and rotting blood. Behind him stood a dozen elite curse-breakers, recruited from the Gringotts Egyptian branch, the finest ward dismantlers in the world. They were clad in heavy dragon-hide coats, their faces pale as they measured the ambient magic with spinning brass instruments. "It's worse than the projections, Supreme Mugwump," the lead curse-breaker, an Egyptian wizard named Tariq, shouted over the howling wind. "The wards aren't just containing the entity, they are aggressively feeding on the surrounding ley lines to maintain the pressure. The seal is actively hostile." "Can it be broken?" Dumbledore asked, his robes whipping violently around him. "Yes, but it won't be surgical," Tariq replied, pointing to the exact center of the crater, where a massive, perfectly smooth slab of obsidian-like granite sat flush with the earth. "The schematics are permanently locked. We have to use brute force, kinetic bombardment. We shatter the capstone, the pressure releases, and you will have exactly a 10-second window to cast a severing charm before the dark magic detonates like a bomb." Dumbledore nodded slowly. He drew the Elder Wand. It pulsed with a brilliant, blinding white light, eager to purge the corruption beneath their feet. "Form up," Dumbledore commanded. "Shield formations. The wards will retaliate when we strike the stone." The team moved in perfect unison, stepping out of the tree line and down into the crater. The moment their boots touched the blackened earth, the mountain reacted. The ground shuddered. From the edges of the crater, massive spikes of jagged earth erupted, rocketing toward the curse-breakers like artillery shells. Dumbledore didn't flinch. He swept the Elder Wand in a wide arc. A dome of translucent, golden light flared into existence. The earthen spikes shattered against the shield, dissolving into harmless dust. He pushed forward, his magic acting as a battering ram, forcing the aggressive, corrupted wards back. Step by step, the expedition marched toward the center of the stadium. The shrieking of the wind began to sound like human screams. The black sap weeping from the earth sizzled as it hit Dumbledore's shield of light. They reached the granite slab. It was 30 feet across, radiating a heat that was almost unbearable, humming with the contained violent agony of the Dark Lord. "Positions!" Tariq roared. The curse-breakers encircled the stone, raising their wands, preparing to cast a massive blasting curse. "Wait!" Dumbledore commanded, raising a hand. His sharp eyes peered through the driving sleet, looking toward the far rim of the crater. 3 figures were emerging from the shadows of the ruined stadium. They did not apparate. They simply walked out of the storm, moving with the terrifying, silent synchronization of an apex predator pack. Sirius Black flanked the left, his heavy combat robes drenched, his wand drawn and held perfectly steady. Lily Potter walked in the center, her green eyes cutting through the gloom, radiating an aura of lethal, unyielding dominance. And on the right, looking hollowed out and ghostly pale, walked Harry. Harry had tried to come alone, to face the madness himself, but the blood wards on the cabin had alerted his mother the moment he left. They had intercepted him at the edge of the Ilvermorny wards. They hadn't argued, they had simply formed up, moving as one to protect their kill. "Halt, Lily!" Dumbledore called out, his magically amplified voice cutting through the storm. "You have been stripped of your authority. If you raise your wands against an ICW-sanctioned expedition, you will be branded international terrorists." "I don't care about your politics, Albus," Lily shouted back, closing the distance until they stood just 30 feet from the granite slab. "Step away from the crypt." "I cannot do that," Dumbledore said, stepping out from behind his shield, facing her directly. "Look at the earth around you, Lily. It is dying. Look at your son. The boy is rotting from the inside out because you chained him to a corpse. You must let me sever this." "I am severing the tether my own way," Lily countered, her wand locked entirely on Dumbledore's chest. "I have the arithmancy. I can pull the resonance out of Harry and cast it into a proxy. He will be free, and Tom Riddle will remain exactly where he belongs, in the dark, forever." "You are playing God with forces you cannot control," Dumbledore pleaded, the sorrow in his voice genuine. "Even if you sever the tether to Harry, the mountain cannot contain the entity's suffering. It will erupt. Millions of innocents will be caught in the magical fallout. You must allow me to grant him a merciful death." "Mercy!" roared Sirius, his voice cracking with rage. "Where was his mercy when he butchered James? Where was his mercy when he hunted this boy for 14 years? He doesn't get mercy. He gets justice." "This is not justice, Sirius. This is cruelty," Dumbledore fired back, his own magical aura flaring, the golden light pushing against the oppressive dark of the crater. "Justice is a clean death. This is vengeance, and it is making you the very monsters you sought to destroy." Dumbledore turned his eyes to Harry. The boy was shivering, clutching his blackened left arm, staring at the granite slab with wide, haunted eyes. "Harry," Dumbledore said softly, dropping the magical amplification. "You can hear him, can't you? You can feel the sheer horror of what is happening under that stone. You are a good person, Harry. Your father's heart beats in your chest. You know this is wrong." Harry looked up. For a moment, the lethal conditioning cracked. His green eyes met Dumbledore's, and the sheer, broken desperation in the boy's gaze was devastating. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg Dumbledore to break it, to end the screaming in his head. "Harry, hold the line," Lily commanded sharply, stepping slightly in front of him, severing the eye contact between the boy and the headmaster. She leveled her wand entirely on Dumbledore. The air between them grew thick, smelling of ozone and copper. The storm seemed to hold its breath. "You want to break my seal, Dumbledore?" Lily said, softly, a terrifying absolute calm washing over her. "You will have to walk over my dead body to do it." Dumbledore looked at the woman who had once been a brilliant, warm-hearted student and saw nothing but an unyielding wall of wrath. He raised the Elder Wand. "So be it," the Supreme Mugwump whispered. The standoff was over. The ideological war had failed. Only violence remained. The first spell was not cast, it was conducted. Albus Dumbledore did not shout an incantation, he simply swept the Elder Wand in a fluid upward arc, and the very air within the crater ignited. A shockwave of pure incandescent light, ancient, elemental, and utterly silent, rolled outward. It wasn't designed to harm, it was designed to overwhelm, to blind, and to strip away the dark magic clinging to the Potter tack. Lily Potter didn't blink. She met the wave of light with a brutal, concussive force. She punched her wand forward, snapping her wrist. A shockwave of condensed gravity slammed into Dumbledore's light, shattering it with a deafening crack that echoed off the mountainside. The duel erupted. It was not a traditional exchange of brightly colored jets of light. It was a terrifying display of absolute magical mastery warring with ruthless military-grade lethality. Dumbledore fought like a force of nature. He manipulated the environment, turning the freezing sleet into thousands of ethereal silver birds that dove to intercept curses, transfiguring the rubble of the stadium into massive moving walls of granite to block Sirius's relentless bombardments. Sirius was a blur of motion. He didn't bother with shields. He moved with feral, aggressive fluidity, constantly advancing, laying down a suppressing fire of explosive hexes and flesh-rending curses that tore chunks out of the earth. Confringo! Reducto! Sectum Sempra! The air roared with the concussive force of his assault. "Keep them off the stone!" Dumbledore roared to the Egyptian curse-breakers, who were desperately chanting over the central obsidian slab, trying to weave their dismantling spells through the chaos. Lily bypassed Dumbledore's transfigured defenses entirely. She didn't attack the walls, she attacked the ground beneath him. With a silent, sweeping gesture, the earth beneath Dumbledore's feet liquefied into a swirling vortex of mud, attempting to drag him down. Dumbledore simply stepped on the air, gravity bending to his will, and cast a sweeping arc of golden fire that forced Lily to dive behind a shattered stone pillar. Harry remained by the edge of the crater, incapacitated. The sheer volume of magic being exchanged over the capstone was sending catastrophic feedback loops up the blood tether. He was on his knees, clutching his chest, his blackened left arm violently spasming. The voice of the Dark Lord was a deafening, continuous shriek in his mind, reacting to the proximity of Dumbledore's light. "Yield, Lily!" Dumbledore shouted, his voice booming like thunder over the storm. With a flick of his wand, chains of pure, white-hot magical energy erupted from the earth, attempting to bind Sirius. Sirius snarled, his eyes flashing with the madness of the Black family line, and simply caught the chains with his bare hand, the skin burning, and physically shattered them with a surge of raw, wandless power. "Never!" Lily screamed back, rising from cover. She leveled her wand, her green eyes cold, and prepared to cast a curse so dark, so fundamentally destructive, that it made the air around her warp and bleed. She was going to kill the supreme mugwump. But as she began the wand movement, the mountain finally had enough. The Egyptian cursebreaker Tarek had managed to isolate the primary structural rune on the obsidian capstone. He raised his heavy, steel-banded wand like a chisel, driving it downward with a screamed incantation. Simultaneously, Sirius Black, dodging a barrage of Dumbledore's silver birds, fired a blind, overpowered blasting curse toward the center of the fray. Dumbledore deflected it with a shimmering shield of hard light. The deflected curse ricocheted perfectly, slamming into the exact microscopic fault line Tarek was striking. The sound that followed defied description. It was not an explosion, it was the sickening, foundational groan of a dying continent. Time seemed to slow down. Lily lowered her wand, her eyes widening in absolute horror. Dumbledore dropped his shield, raising his hands. Sirius froze. A single hairline fracture appeared on the smooth surface of the massive granite slab. For a fraction of a second, absolute silence fell over the crater. Then, the hyper-pressurized, mutated ancient rot finally erupted. It did not break out, it exploded upward with the force of a volcanic geyser. The granite capstone, weighing hundreds of tons, shattered into 1,000,000 jagged pieces of shrapnel. A towering pillar of corrosive crimson and black magic rocketed into the sky, punching a hole straight through the storm clouds. The physical shockwave threw everyone off their feet. Tarek and 3 of his cursebreakers were vaporized instantly, entirely consumed by the geyser of dark magic, their bodies dissolving before they could even scream. Sirius was thrown backward through the air, slamming brutally into the jagged remains of a stadium seating tier. Lily hit the mud, rolling, instinctively throwing up a dome shield that immediately began to hiss and melt under the rain of falling acidic black sludge. The smell was apocalyptic, a suffocating miasma of burning hair, ancient copper, and rotting earth. At the edge of the crater, Harry convulsed violently, screaming as his magical core was subjected to the sheer, unmitigated terror of the entity below, finally feeling the pressure shift. His left arm didn't just burn, the skin began to crack, bleeding black light. The geyser of rot continued to spew violently from the jagged hole in the earth. The containment wards, deprived of their capstone, began to cannibalize themselves, causing the edges of the crater to violently collapse inward. The earth was trying to bury the wound. "Harry!" Lily screamed over the roaring maelstrom, scrambling to her feet and sprinting towards her son, ignoring the searing burns the raining sludge was leaving on her skin. Dumbledore slowly stood up from the mud. His midnight blue robes were torn and stained, his silver hair plastered to his face. The Elder Wand pulsed with a desperate, blinding light. He looked at the geyser of pure suffering, and a profound, devastating sorrow washed over his aged face. He did not run away. He stepped forward, directly towards the open, screaming maw of the crypt. The heat radiating from the open shaft was enough to blister skin from 50 feet away. But Dumbledore walked into the storm of dark magic. He raised the Elder Wand high above his head. Expecto Patronus Maxima! It wasn't a single animal. A blinding tidal wave of pure silver light erupted from his wand, taking the form of a massive, blazing phoenix. The Patronus crashed into the geyser of black rot, fighting it back, parting the sea of dark magic just enough for Dumbledore to reach the edge of the chasm. He looked down. Hundreds of feet below, at the bottom of the crushed granite prison, lay the architect of the First Wizarding War. Lord Voldemort was unrecognizable. He was no longer a man, nor a snake-like terror. He was a malformed, agonizing husk. The sheer, crushing pressure of millions of tons of rock had pulverized his bones into dust, fusing his pale flesh with the jagged granite. He was a flattened, twisted mass of constantly regenerating, constantly dying tissue. Only one crimson eye and a ragged, torn mouth were visible, staring up toward the sliver of gray sky he hadn't seen in nearly a year. The entity let out a sound. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't a threat. It was a high, thin, broken wail of absolute, unadulterated begging. Albus Dumbledore, the only wizard Voldemort ever feared, looked down at the ruined, eternal prisoner. Dumbledore did not feel triumph. He did not feel the righteous vindication of a general who had defeated his enemy. He felt only the crushing weight of the tragedy. He wept, the tears mixing with the freezing rain and the black sludge on his cheeks. "Look at what you made of yourself, Tom," Dumbledore whispered into the roaring abyss. "Look at what we made of you." The entity's crimson eye fixed on Dumbledore's shimmering silver aura. The torn mouth moved, the wet, rasping voice echoing up the shaft, audible over the collapsing earth. "Mercy, please, end it." Dumbledore nodded slowly. He pointed the Elder Wand directly down into the abyss. He bypassed the complex dismantling spells, bypassing the political decrees. He reached into the very foundation of his magical core, calling upon a spell older than Hogwarts, older than the ICW. It was not a spell of destruction. It was a spell of absolute severing, a release. Requiescat in pace. A single, silent beam of translucent golden light shot from the tip of the Elder Wand. It traveled down the shaft, piercing the darkness, and struck the mangled husk of Voldemort directly in the center. There was no explosion. There was only a profound, sudden exhalation of breath. The physical, ruined body of Tom Riddle instantly turned to fine white ash. The horrific, immortal regeneration ceased. From the ash, a shrieking, formless cloud of black vapor erupted. It tore upward, screaming a sound of both absolute fury and agonizing relief, bursting past Dumbledore, shooting into the stormy sky, and scattering to the four winds. The Dark Lord was dead. The spirit, fractured and powerless, had fled. But the destruction of the body meant the blood tether had lost its anchor. On the ridge, Harry Potter's body arched backward with such violent force that his spine audibly cracked. The severance of the blood tether was not clean. It was a brutal, physical snapping of his magical core. The necrotic black veins on his left arm suddenly flared a blinding, searing white, and then the skin simply burst. Harry let out a scream that shredded his vocal cords, collapsing into the mud as his left forearm was violently flayed by the magical backlash. Lily slid into the mud beside him, her hands glowing with frantic healing magic, but she couldn't stop the hemorrhage of dark energy pouring out of the wound. But the tether wasn't the only thing that snapped. Deep in the earth, the containment wards, which had relied on the physical presence of Voldemort's agony to maintain their structural integrity, realized their prisoner was gone. The magic collapsed inward. The ground beneath Dumbledore, Lily, and Harry gave way. The entire northern slope of Mount Greylock began to cave in on itself. The crater widened rapidly, swallowing the stone, the mud, and the trees. It was a catastrophic sinkhole, hundreds of feet deep. Lily grabbed Harry by his tactical vest, trying to pull him up, but the earth was falling out under her boots. They were sliding backwards into the abyss, tons of jagged granite and black mud raining down from above, threatening to bury them alive in the very tomb she had created. Dumbledore, suspended momentarily by a levitation charm, tried to cast a structural support, but his magic was utterly exhausted from the severing charm. Above them, on the jagged, collapsing rim of the crater, stood Sirius Black. He was bleeding from a severe head wound, his left leg broken at an unnatural angle. He looked down into the collapsing maw of the earth, watching Lily and Harry sliding towards inevitable death, crushed beneath a landslide of mountain rock. Sirius did not hesitate. He did not run. He slammed his hands down onto the collapsing mud in front of him. He bypassed his wand entirely. He bypassed traditional spellcraft. He reached into the darkest, most ancient recess of his bloodline, the madness that had claimed Bellatrix, the crushing oceanic gravity that defined the House of Black. Sirius screamed, not in pain, but in sheer primal defiance. Toujours pure! A wave of terrifying, pitch-black magic, so dense it warped the light around it, exploded from his palms. It shot downward into the collapsing sinkhole. It didn't stop the rocks, it caught them. The landslide froze in mid-air. Millions of tons of jagged granite, mud, and water suddenly hung suspended over Lily and Harry, locked in an invisible, crushing grip of localized gravity. Lily looked up, her breath catching in her throat. Sirius was on his knees on the ridge, his arms trembling violently as he physically bore the weight of the collapsing mountain through his magic. Blood began to pour from his nose, his eyes, and his ears. The sheer impossible strain was shattering his physical body. The bones in his arms began to splinter audibly, cracking under the pressure of holding up the earth. "Run!" Sirius choked out, his vocal cords tearing with the effort, his eyes completely bloodshed. Lily hoisted Harry onto her shoulder. She didn't look back. She scrambled up the suspended, floating debris, using the frozen rocks as a staircase, hauling her son out of the abyss. Dumbledore followed, his face pale with awe at the sheer, suicidal magnitude of the magic Sirius was holding. The moment Lily dragged Harry over the lip of the stable earth, Sirius's magic broke. He collapsed forward. The black gravity field vanished. With a deafening roar, the mountain collapsed completely. Millions of tons of jagged granite slammed into the bottom of the crater, sealing the tomb forever, violently kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris that blanketed the ridge. Lily dropped Harry on the safe grass and sprinted back toward where Sirius had been. She found him lying on his back in the mud. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the stormy sky. His arms were mangled, and his spine was bent at a horrifying angle. The magic had saved his family, but it had entirely broken his body. "Sirius," Lily sobbed, dropping to her knees, her bloodied hands hovering over him, terrified to touch him lest she exacerbate the internal injuries. "Sirius, stay with me." Sirius slowly turned his head. He looked past Lily towards Harry, who was lying in the mud, unconscious but free of the dark resonance. A faint, bloody smile touched Sirius's lips. "We won, Lils," he whispered, before his eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness. The news hit the global magical network less than 48 hours later. It was broadcast on the Wizarding Wireless, printed on the front page of the Daily Prophet, the New York Ghost, and Le Cri de la Gargoule. Albus Dumbledore, standing before the full assembly of the International Confederation of Wizards, delivered a speech that shook the foundation of the magical world. He revealed the truth of the Triwizard Tournament. He exposed the brutal, merciless methods of the Royal Magical Auditor. He detailed the horrific, living entombment of Lord Voldemort and the subsequent destruction of the physical body. He confirmed that Voldemort was reduced to a fleeing, powerless spirit. The war was officially over. But Dumbledore made it clear that the victors were not heroes. "We cannot defeat the darkness by burying it alive," Dumbledore's voice echoed from a wireless radio sitting on a dusty table. "We cannot allow our laws to be rewritten by vengeance." Lily Potter and her associates crossed a line from which there is no return. They are no longer agents of justice. They are dangerous, radical extremists. A hand reached out and clicked the radio off. The safe house was located somewhere in the desolate, freezing expanses of the Canadian Yukon. It was a bleak, heavily warded concrete bunker buried under the snow. There was no fireplace. There was no warmth. Remus Lupin stood by the radio, staring at the concrete wall. He had returned. The fracture in the pack remained, but when Albus Dumbledore had released the arrest warrants, Remus realized he could not abandon them to the wolves. He was the conscience they ignored, but he was still family. In the corner of the room, sitting in a heavily enchanted floating wheelchair, was Sirius Black. His body was wrapped in heavy bandages, his spine supported by rigid magical braces. He would never walk again. The Black family magic had burned out his nervous system. His physical lethality was gone, replaced by a dark, quiet intensity in his sunken eyes. Lily stood by a metal workbench, her face an unreadable mask. She was methodically loading armor-piercing rounds into a mundane assault rifle before enchanting the magazines with expanding runes. Her auditor badge was gone. Her ICW protections were stripped. The global magical community had branded her public enemy number 1. She slammed the magazine into the rifle with a sharp clack. McCusa Orrs raided the Berkshire's cabin this morning. They found nothing. But Dumbledore's order is tracking our magical signatures. We can't stay here long. "We move tonight," Lily commanded, her voice devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "We head for the European underground. If Voldemort's spirit fled, it will try to find a host. It will try to rebuild. I am not going to let that happen." "Lily," Remus sighed, a tired, broken sound. "You are stripped of rank. The ICW has shoot-to-kill orders for us. We are fugitives. The war is over." "The war ends when the spirit is destroyed," Lily replied coldly, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. She turned to look at the far side of the bunker. Harry sat on a military cot in the shadows. He looked completely different. The dark, necrotic magic was gone from his system, but the sheer trauma of the tether had left its mark. His left arm, from the elbow down, was covered in a thick, jagged lattice of burn scars that looked like lightning strikes. His eyes, once a vibrant, killing cur's green, had dulled to the color of frozen jade. He didn't look like a teenager. He looked like a veteran of a 50-year war. He was quietly sharpening a combat knife against a whetstone, the rhythmic shk, shk, the only sound in the bunker. He looked up, meeting his mother's eyes. There was no softness in his gaze, only a cold, terrifying readiness. They were no longer the law. They were no longer the celebrated heroes of a hidden war. They were outcasts, heavily armed, morally shattered, and absolutely lethal. Lily Potter looked at her broken, terrifying family and nodded. "We are the monsters they think we are," Lily said softly into the freezing air. "Let's show them why." The Potter Pack is officially rogue, but who was actually in the right? If you side with Dumbledore's mercy, comment light. If you agree with Lily's ruthless justice, comment dark. Let me know your theories for Year 6 down below, and I'll see you in the next video.